And so, oh, sorry, just got an email from Erin. Oh, she's being directed. So we should have our slides in a second here. But yeah, so I was the CCP coordinator for Bonaparte for a couple of years. With that, I started joining the CCP workshops in 2015. Absolutely fell in love and was just so inspired by all the work that was happening throughout BC with all of the communities that were a part of CCP. And in 2016, I became a CCP mentor myself. So I've been able to support communities in their own journeys with CCP, and really the biggest part of my CCP journey with Bonaparte was the engagement. So developed a lot of best practices within a small community of how to engage a community through the CCP process. And especially being an elected councillor at the time, which we say in CCP, you shouldn't be both, but it worked out at the time. And so really being able to have buy-in from chief and council to support, and from there having our CCP begin and seeing all of the engagement that happened in so many numerous ways. And so I'll touch a bit more on that in a little bit on our slides here, but that's just a little bit about me. I would like to know, I don't know if folks want to write in the chat. I know there's a way on Zoom when you have slides to be able to mark on the side, and that's what I had set up originally. But since we don't have the slides yet, maybe I think you can just raise your hand. How many folks here are just brand new to CCP? Couple, few. All right, so I got a few who are brand new. How about folks who are in maybe the pre-planning stage where you're just starting out with CCP in your community? Any folks in the pre-planning? Awesome. Yeah, I see a few hands and thumbs going up. And how about any folks who are maybe in the planning stage where they've started some community engagement, perhaps been in for, I don't know, anywhere from a couple months in engagement to a year or more than that? Okay, well, let's see some comments. And so, yeah, so I see some comments here. So yeah, this is CCP Basics. So this is really intended for those who are just starting out or who may need kind of a refresher on CCP, really the history, the different stages of planning. So I don't know if some folks didn't get put into the right room.
I think that hi Cara, and hey everyone. I think they're just sorting out the breakout sessions. Being it's our first go at this, it looks like some people have landed in the wrong breakouts. So you are in CCP Basics with wonderful Cara. If you were looking for the implementation breakout, you're welcome to stay. Or otherwise, you'll have to go back to you'll leave the meeting and then be redirected. But we're just working on getting those challenges through there, and appreciate everyone's patience.
Thank you. Okay, can you see my screen? I figure I might as well just share since Erin's not here. You can see it? Okay, cool. So I just, whoops. So I'll skip this since we kind of went through this. This is a picture from last year's comprehensive community planning workshop that we had in Seabird Island. So I just wanted to share this and us to kind of visualize ourselves, even though we're virtual right now, but this is the community that typically comes together, which is so big and beautiful in the ways that we could engage with one another. But it's so great that we can continue to gather regardless of COVID in this way and keep this important work going forward. So it's always nice to come together at this time of year for comprehensive community planning. So I already introduced myself. This is a snapshot of my community, Bonaparte. So as I mentioned, I was the comprehensive community planner there. We began pre-planning and just looking at the plans that we all had in place, and that's kind of where we started, and really determining if the community was ready. And we decided that we were ready. And so from there, we went into community engagement, where we did all sorts of different community engagement sessions, where we held like open houses. We had different meetings where we would do like World Cafe style. We would have the money bags that was mentioned earlier, and also even just having meetings out on the land, which was really exciting to just have an Indigenous approach to the way that we were going to bring community engagement out for Bonaparte. And so with that, we heard from all of our community members, both on and off reserve. And I think that's a really important piece to remember about CCP, is that it's for all members. And so when we're typically in community, we have a very specific mindset toward on reserve, because that's kind of how the federal system is set up in our funding structures. But it's so important to be able to consider all members, all community members, those living in community, those who may be married into community but aren't actually registered with the community, those who are part of the community, all community members, and those who don't live in community, and engaging them as best we can. And that was one of the really cool best practices that Bonaparte developed, was engaging off-reserve members by reaching out in numerous ways through social media, through actually hosting off-reserve sessions, and through surveys. So we would send out surveys, and I would even do like handwritten letters to try and get more folks being engaged and meeting with us. So a little bit about Bonaparte's, and the CCP was actually completed in, 2018, I believe. And so my community is currently working through implementing it, and it has been working well. They decided to have it as a one-year plan just because our capacity was low at the time. And so we did what worked best for us. And so we were looking at a one-year plan, and the community is currently implementing that. So in the CCP 101 that Jessie shared, I wasn't a part of it, but I know she touched a little bit on the CCP Handbook. So this is a really great resource for those who are brand new or those who are working through the comprehensive community planning process, because this has a ton of best practices. And so for those who may not know, CCP started in BC as a pilot project with 5 First Nations communities. From there, and that was in about 2004, 2006. From there, the communities brought all the best practices, the experience that happened in those pilot projects, and began developing the CCP Handbook. And from there, it just started spreading across BC. And to date, there have been over 100, so more than half and a majority of the BC First Nations who have completed or begun or been a part of the CCP process. And so that's so incredible, because BC has been a leader in comprehensive community planning. We may have folks who are not from BC in the session, or I know in the workshop overall, and we typically do, because we are a little bit ahead of the game, I think, in CCP, but it's so cool to see how it's spread throughout Canada. There's other provinces who have begun the process, who are building their mentorship initiatives, and we've had national workshops, which has been really cool to hear from all the different territories throughout Canada. And so that's a really cool part about CCP. And so with this is our 3rd edition. The first edition was in 2006. And then it was edited again in 2010, and it's a living document to ensure that it's living up to everything that's happening with CCP, because it grows every single year. And so within the CCP Handbook, you're going to find the history, you're going to find some really cool best practices. You'll see the planning process really in detail about what the planning process is, and I'm going to touch on that as well. But you'll also see some really cool resources and tools for any sort of like meetings or things that you're doing within the CCP process. And so I definitely recommend to check out this. You can access it directly online. I imagine you can probably request a hard copy as well from Indigenous Services Canada. But it's really to guide you through the process as a toolkit. By no means is it something that you have to follow. I think the important thing about comprehensive community planning is that it's meant for the community to design it to what works best for the community. And so thinking about comprehensive community planning, for those who are brand new, like I haven't even said this, what is comprehensive community planning? So based on the CCP Handbook, comprehensive community planning is a process that enables a community to build my slide's a little, whoops. I can't even read the full thing there, sorry. To build a roadmap to sustainability, self-sufficiency, and improved governance capacity. And so this is one of the ways that we can describe comprehensive community planning. Really, comprehensive community planning is it's a really powerful tool for First Nations to get on a path to where they want to go, to really bring out what the community vision is for where they want to be in 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 years down the road. It's an overarching plan to other plans that communities may have. And so communities will really define it to what works best for them. Like I said, it's always unique to each community. And with that, like I said, it's really an opportunity for communities to dream. I think with the oppression that First Nations typically face and the pressure we're under with the different systems and structures that we're a part of, we kind of lose sight. And I know some of our communities and our members lose sight on how we can dream for our communities, because some things feel impossible day to day, and it's really hard. But really the important part of CCP is that it is for our community members to dream. We don't want to hold them back in what they want to see for their community. It's about letting them use their voice, empowering them. And that was the really amazing thing that I saw happen in Bonaparte when I was supporting the CCP processes. In one of our meetings, I had a knowledge keeper stand up, and he was so excited about CCP because he said he attended a meeting and it was an opportunity where he finally felt like his voice was heard, where he was able to say what was on his heart and his mind, get things off his chest. And that's so often what we'll see throughout communities. And from what we know of CCP is that it is a healing process as well for our members, because it is opening up conversations that perhaps weren't happening before. And so it's very powerful in that way. And from there, we'll start to be able to really understand what our community members' needs are, where they want to go. And it's in our own way. So it's our own planning process that happens. And so as we go through planning, our communities plan for all aspects of the community. So that's why it's called comprehensive community planning, is that it will consider every aspect of the community, whether it's any of these that are here laid out, like governance, education, infrastructure, whatever it is. But don't feel limited to just these different sectors that you might see within the CCP handbook or on this slide. Make sure that you're capturing everything that the community, that is a part of the community. Perhaps there's things that are so unique to the culture and the First Nation that you're a part of, that you want to make sure that that's a part of the planning process, where communities are focusing on that and really identifying what they want to see for their vision and their goals and objectives. And so, as I mentioned, CCP is that big overarching plan in community. So this plan, like I said, it's going to be anywhere from 1 year to 3 years to 5 years. It's a long-term plan where communities are thinking way in the future what they want to see for their membership. And it's not a technical plan. So it's going to outline goals and objectives for what the community wants to achieve in each of those different sectors, like governance or education or housing, but it's not going to be super technical in how it's going to be implemented. It's supposed to guide the community to get toward achieving that vision that's there. And so with that will come other plans in community, because as we know, and what seems to be happening in the past so many years, is that communities are undergoing so much planning. Some communities are probably really exhausted of planning, but there's ways that all these plans work together. So CCP is kind of that umbrella plan, that overarching plan, and then in comes perhaps the Chief and Council strategic plan that's going to be informed from the CCP, so that Chief and Council has that specific buy-in and it's not just sitting on the shelf. They're going to be moving it along. And then from there will come other things like land use plans, health plans, administration work plans, and really identifying strategically as it comes down for how it's going to be achieved for the community. And so it's really a powerful process for communities to have a clear direction forward of what the community wants to see. So it's community driven, and being able to really outline how they're going to achieve that forward with all the other plans that are in place. And I think there are some sessions specific to really implementing the strategic or the CCP plan and things like that, that will be supportive for communities who are going through the CCP a little bit further. And so thinking about our communities and why we should plan, I've kind of mentioned a little bit about that already. Like I said, it's a healing tool. It's a way to guide our communities forward, to have really clear direction. It is a very strong governance tool to hold Chief and Council accountable to what community members want. And so there's all these different ways, and it's so important to really identify why we should plan for our individual communities. Perhaps we are lacking in capacity. Perhaps we have so much turnover in chief and council, and we don't really see things happening through those terms. If they're just 2-year terms, it's hard to achieve things. And so if there's constant turnover in chief and council or even band administration, community is probably getting frustrated. And so we just need to think, why should we plan for our communities? What do our communities need? And really outline that as we're doing what's called pre-planning. And so I'm going to get into that in a little bit here, but I just wanted to put this out here for folks who are brand new to really think of why we should plan for our communities. And I think the most important piece is that healing and reconciliation piece, but also to just have some direction forward, because typically I think a lot of our communities do struggle with having things move forward and really accountability. And so this is a really great reason that we should plan for our communities. And this is a quote that came from a Bonaparte elder as we did our CCP process. And I think it's so important because when we think of comprehensive community planning as it is community driven, it's us stepping away from these federal and provincial and Western models of working and really stepping into our own and outlining how we do planning for our communities in our own ways. And so I know a lot of our elders can get frustrated, and you'll see that in some meetings and some engagement, but they have so much wisdom in the reason that we do plan and the ways that it's going to support our communities going forward. So I thought this was a really beautiful quote that was shared from an elder in a meeting, and it'll be really, and I totally recommend as you're going through planning to take verbatim notes. If you hear someone say something really meaningful and you think it can go directly into the plan as such, you should do that, because it really just adds to the plan that much more. And so this little slide here, I wanted to talk about elevator pitch. I think an elevator pitch also when doing CCP is so important as a comprehensive community planner, or any kind of planning that you're doing, whatever your role is in CCP, to have a really strong understanding of what it means to you and what it can do for the community. Because perhaps you have a chief and council, maybe they're brand new, they have no idea what CCP is. And so you're going to meet with them and you're going to tell them what it is. Chief and councils are so busy. They have so much they have to do. They have every aspect of the community that they have to care for. And so keeping it as minimal and to the point and meaningful as possible, I think is very important. So elevator pitches are so important to be able to go in really quickly, explain to them what it means. And I don't know if other folks know this, but when the Assembly of First Nations come together, they have a federal model where they can only have 5 slides on a PowerPoint and only a maximum of 5 points per slide. So really, really straight to the point, what's going on, and then no more than that, because I think sometimes we can get into these 20-point slides. We want to get everything out there, but just considering our leadership and any of others who we want to really have engaged in CCP, if you maybe get a community member, which is so, which happens so often with CCP, is you might have a community member come up to you who's like, what's the point of CCP? Really don't think it's going to matter for our community to do this. It's not going to make a difference. If you really believe in the process and you have maybe an elevator pitch or some response that's going to be outlining everything for CCP, then that can change some minds. And that's so important to be able to do throughout your time in CCP. And so I've been doing the CCP Basics session for a few years now, which is really awesome. And it's looked different every year. And Chris Erickson kind of started the CCP 101. And that was, I think, in 2016. And so he really started incredible path for what it looks like for CCP Basics. And I've been thinking about this presentation for some time because we're virtual now. And I imagine a lot of communities aren't doing in-person engagement. And so it's going to look a lot different from what we were doing before, where we would say, host in-person meetings, do open houses, go door to door, all those things that we can't really do now with COVID. All communities have different protocols in place with COVID. And so The basics are going to look a little bit different, because before we'd say, you know, you need flip chart paper and you need nice smelly pens and things like that to take notes as you're going through your sessions. But I think now part of the basics is going to be able to look at different ways to virtually engage members, perhaps still going door to door with surveys or phone calls or Zoom meetings like this online as we're gathering, and all these innovative ways that are coming forward. And there's been some pretty cool examples that I've seen happening. I know in Bonaparte, one of our coordinators actually got corn for everyone with her budget. And that was just before Thanksgiving. And she went and delivered it safely with COVID protocols to each house and just said, you know, this is my job, that I'm hoping to get some engagement with community. I'd love to have a phone call with you. And this corn is just from the department to you, to your family, as a way to exchange that knowledge that we're hoping to get for our community. And I thought that was really beautiful, because that, in my culture, goes back to our traditional ways of exchange. And so we want to get information from our community members, but what are we giving in return to them? Perhaps, you know, CCP isn't going to be able to have a quick start project right away, or be able to really show community members how it's making an impact yet. So perhaps we can find unique ways to engage them right now, with the budget that might have supported, you know, community gathering meals and things like that. So just finding ways like that to really engage community members is so important. Okay, so getting into like the technical parts, I guess, of CCP and really what it is to the planning process. We start over here at pre-planning. And so pre-planning is, as I mentioned earlier, when communities are just starting out, brand new to CCP, determining if the community is ready. So in the CCP Handbook, there's actually some very clear indicators of what makes a community ready to go through a comprehensive community plan. And this is also looking at other plans that have happened in community, or even if maybe a CCP was developed years ago and just hasn't been looked at. And so thinking where the community currently is sitting, are we ready? How are we going to get there? How are we going to start our CCP? We want to secure funding from Indigenous Services Canada, or perhaps allocate our own resources to support the planning process. All those specific things, a work plan, hiring a CCP coordinator, putting a CCP planning team together. That's all kind of a part of pre-planning, and that'll be between administration and chief and council, and getting that going. And then as community determines that they're ready for the CCP process, you'll move into the planning phase. And the planning phase really can't have a timeline. Communities spend anywhere from 2 to 5 years developing their comprehensive community plan. And honestly, a bulk of that will be in the planning phase. So the planning phase is your community engagement. It's where you're going to develop the vision for the community. So that'll be the overarching vision that community wants to achieve for the community. That's what they see happening long term. And that could be anything from, like, say, for an example, a vision might be, we are a healthy, strong, self-governing nation who thrive on our culture and language, something like that, something that the community really wants to have achieved. And then from the vision, and the vision can be developed, there's no specific way to develop that vision. You'll kind of determine that as you go through the planning process. And there's unique ways to do that that are shared in the CCP Handbook as well, and from other mentors and whatnot. But from there, you'll also identify community values. So we have our vision, what are our community values for how that vision is actually going to be achieved? And also within the comprehensive community plan, as I mentioned, there's all those different sectors that the community plans for, with housing and culture and language and all those different aspects. And within those different sectors, there'll be goals and objectives for what the community wants to achieve. And so really that's what you're doing in the planning phase, is you're engaging community to find out the community vision, the values, the goals and objectives for all comprehensive aspects of the community. And then from there, as a community may feel exhausted from engagement, maybe you spent 1 year or 2 years, however long it takes, and you feel you've gotten everything out of the community possible, everyone's voice has been heard, the comprehensive community plan will start to be drafted. Communities will start to write it. It'll be approved by community and approved and adopted by chief and council. And that's really important for it to be adopted by chief and council, so community sees that that's going to be used as a governance tool to actually move the community forward in the way that they've outlined. And then from there into the next planning phase is implementation. And so this is when the CCP actually gets implemented, and that'll typically, as I mentioned, as it's the overarching plan, will be through other chief and council strategic plans, different department work plans, and different ways throughout the community. And a really cool thing, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't dive into it, is quick start projects. And so a really awesome piece of CCP is if a community member mentions something and you kind of hear it often throughout community, say, I guess I'll use Bonaparte as an example, is when we first started engagement with Bonaparte, we had a community member who was saying, you know, we should change our logo. I think we need to rebrand. And I thought, okay, cool. Like maybe that's something really simple we could do right away without having any money in place or anything to do it. Perhaps we put out a logo contest, and that's something we can start right away and show members that their voices are being heard. And so that was a quick start project that we could do without any need for funding or any kind of major resources to be able to get it going. And so if you are going through the engagement process and you see some really cool idea come up that you could do right then and there to show community how CCP is already being implemented and being impactful in community, then totally do that in any way you can, because that's really going to help with community and even chief and council and any other administration buy-in. But as you go through and the CCP is completed, that's when implementation comes up and the community begins to implement it. And because this is a cycle, so this is a process, it's continuously living document, the community will develop a monitoring and evaluation process. So maybe the community will look at it every year. Perhaps the community members will get together and the administration, chief and council can showcase, you know, how have we achieved certain goals and objectives within the plan? And community will say, okay, that's great, that has been accomplished. And then that'll have to keep happening throughout, because perhaps, you know, you had set out as a 5-year plan, but maybe in 3 years it's doing so well and so much for the community that we've accomplished everything. And so perhaps then if we've already accomplished everything, we have to revisit and go through this cycle again to be able to continuously update and look to the document as much as necessary for a community. And then I just have like some specific pieces here around those for those who are brand new, because some of the pieces that are going to come up in your CCP is developing a budget. And so I noticed that a lot of folks who are brand new get stuck on this piece sometimes with really knowing what to include and what it looks like. And so here are just some funding sources that are typically where communities find the resources to fund their CCP and community. And so you can apply with Indigenous Services Canada. Some communities, as I mentioned, do use own source revenue. So that would be up to the chief and council. But the website also has some more funding options there as well. And there's some really cool sessions that help folks with doing the applications for the funding too. But most importantly, the bulk of the funding is probably going to be toward the CCP coordinator, salary and travel. I think now travel might not be needed depending on community, but it's really important to have a full-time person there. The average wage, I say this average because I mean, it's totally up to the community for what they see working best with community. Could be anywhere for $18 to $25, could be more depending on what it looks like really if it's going to be a broader scope for this position with the benefits. And then even considering if that coordinator needs a CCP support worker. In Bonaparte, we had both a CCP coordinator and a CCP communications worker because the most important part of it was the engagement. So we wanted to make sure we had someone who had a communication engagement strategy put forward to community. And then there's things that you can purchase like capital laptops for the CCP workers, iPads perhaps for kind of surveys or anything like that might be done in community, a camera to capture photos of any CCP work that's being done, because it's really great to put that into the plan when it is completed and anything like that. There's also project supplies, as I mentioned, which now I think is going to look a little bit different with virtual, but anything that might be needed depending on how community is engaging. And then honorarium, because we really want to value the time and the input that is coming from community. So I touched on a little bit, but a lot of communities will put a planning team in place. And so this might consist of youth and elders, adults, perhaps different family representatives, any kind of traditional governance that is in community that you can identify can be into the planning team. But really the hope is to have perhaps anywhere from, I would say, anywhere from 5 to 10, maybe no more than 10 people on a planning team. And they're going to help you throughout the comprehensive community planning process. So those are community members. Maybe it's great to have someone off reserve, a part of that planning team, so that you can really hear what the off reserve concerns are. And the point of the planning team is they're bringing concerns to you so that you can ensure you're going through the comprehensive community planning process and planning for how you're going to tackle those. So perhaps they're coming to you and you consistently hear housing. Housing is a big issue in community. So you hear that so often, okay, that's probably going to be our number one priority that we're going to start engaging community on. And then you'll kind of see from there where the priorities are at to ensure that you're engaging community at the right times for what the needs are really in the present day and going forward. And then of course, elders, perhaps you have an elder do a blessing or a prayer or provide their insight in any way. In Bonaparte, we actually did honorariums for elders to video record them. And we just asked for them to share the history of the community and to be able to ask them what they want to see going forward. And that was a really cool way to capture their voices and something that we would have forever. And you could do similar things with youth. Youth are so important because they're typically our innovators. They're gonna have some really cool ideas that we probably won't think of. We used to go into schools, and again, with COVID, probably can't go into schools, but engaging youth as best we can and finding ways perhaps they can be used to help with virtual things, right? Like maybe they are way better at Zoom or any of these different technologies than we are. And so finding ways for them to support is really powerful to empower them and amplify their voices too. And of course, a work plan is so important for our CCP coordinators. And Chris Derrickson, if anyone knows him, he always makes fun of this work plan because he's like, this is so many things that Elaine put in that the coordinators were supposed to do in such a short amount of time. So this was actually my work plan when I started out that Elaine Alec developed. And then Chris was my mentor. And he's like, this is crazy. How are you going to do all this? And I was like, oh, I thought it was great. Like, I have a really clear idea going forward. And it was really helpful. And so this is just an idea of some of the things that can happen in the different stages. And so we started in September and we were going into the planning phase and wanted to ensure that we were doing all the engagement that we could. We requested a CCP mentor. And so that's a really important thing I want to touch on is if you're brand new or you're kind of maybe having some difficulties getting through the process, it's really great to request a CCP mentor. So you can get in touch with Laura for that. And throughout, I think there's maybe some time throughout the sessions with CCP mentors. Hey, Laura. Yeah. Okay. And they will help you through the process. So there's someone that you can check in with that can share best practices that can, if you're really just, there's something that's come up and you're having a hard time to get through it, they can just give some advice and guidance. And there's no charge to the community for that whatsoever. Beforehand, we were able to travel out to communities. Of course, now that's probably going to look a lot different. But it's been amazing to be able to mentor communities because, when I was going through the process and having Chris there and just when things would come up and even someone to vent to who's been through it themselves is so awesome because, it's hard because you're having community members come at you at all angles because you're the person now who's the go-to who they actually want to bring concerns and issues forward with. And so having a mentor in place is really awesome. And then just different things with the pre-planning, things like I was mentioning with background information, methodology, so how you're going to actually do the plan and the planning. And then we created a CCP community survey, which was really great. And I think it'll be really great right now with COVID. And then hosting specific meetings was really cool to be able to bring elders together, men and women, different family sessions, the best way possible. And then we just went through that. So we developed this work plan and then we kind of defined it a little bit further as we got along to see what was really working, what wasn't working. But I totally recommend developing a work plan and having that work plan guide you throughout the process because sometimes you can get lost in it because you'll have all of this information coming at you and then suddenly be like, holy, what am I supposed to do with all of this information? And so finding ways to be able to just organize is really great throughout the whole process too. And this is just a picture from a few years ago in Bonaparte in our engagement. And so as you're going through, you're going to find the ways that work best for your community for engagement. And it totally is a trial and error process. You know, before when we could host community engagement sessions in person, sometimes maybe no one shows up, maybe one person shows up, but those people who come, and this is what I love that I've heard so often throughout CCP community, is the ones who show up are meant to be there. And it's so true, because there were times when only one person showed up to one of my meetings, but the amount of knowledge and feedback that I was able to receive with that one person one-on-one was so powerful. And that was really what made a difference in Bonaparte and comprehensive community planning. And so it'll look different. This was a World Cafe style meeting that we did. We had some youth there and they were sharing back what they had talked about with some of the questions we put out to community. But totally be as creative as you can, because that's what CCP is all about, is doing whatever works best for the community. Don't make it too technical. What I've noticed in my planning work is that storytelling is so powerful. So if you can find a way to ask folks to share their stories, that's a really awesome, if we want to get technical, gaps analysis process where they can share a story, you can hear their concerns and you'll be able to pull it out of there. Okay, well then if this wasn't in place for them, what could we put in that would be able to support that situation in the future? And then comes, after the engagement and the development of the plan, comes actually writing the plan. And you'll see with the plans that have been completed, they're all super unique and they're so cool, and they don't have to be written a certain way. It doesn't even have to be a written document. It could be a visual like this. And so this came from one of the BC communities, and I found it online, and I just thought it was so cool to see, because there are some communities who have just a simple one-page document that showcase their comprehensive community plan. And so totally make it unique to your community. There's such great examples from all of the communities that have completed so far. West Bank and Penticton were two of the first to really complete, and they have some really cool, they have really cool documents for how they completed their CCPs. And it's always very, they're all done in Indigenous ways, which is so beautiful. And so, you know, find these innovative ways to be able to really showcase those plans that make sense to community. And of course, again, that's the most important piece, is making sure it makes sense to community so that it's not going to be put to the side after it's done. And it'll be meaningful, and it'll be something that community looks to and is really a part of as long as it's in place and being implemented and evaluated and monitored as you're going along. And so that's all the slides I have. I just like to end on this note, because like I said, it can get hard in comprehensive community planning, and you'll get so in your brain about it as you're going through it. You might feel like you're not doing things right, or, you know, like you're just so bogged down with all of this feedback. You know, just follow your heart with the process, because it is such a powerful process to go through, and it'll totally make a difference for your community. Again, you know, have that elevator pitch ready for those who might not feel like they're a part of the process or believe in the process, and just do your best. And that's the important part. Like, there's no right or wrong way to go about it. It's totally up to the community, and that's the really great thing about comprehensive community planning. So I'm going to stop sharing there. And I'm gonna open it up. And sorry, I haven't seen your comments until now because I had my screen up, but I think we have, how long do we have? 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes? Oh, and I have someone knocking on my door. So just give me 1 second, and then I will open it up for questions. Okay, so I'm just gonna look through the chat. We just have a little bit, and I'm getting kicked out of my hotel room pretty quick here, so I will answer. So I can definitely share my presentation out. Yeah, and totally post in the chat if you'd like. But yeah, if anyone has any questions right now, I'm totally open for any. Perhaps if there's anything I missed, I know I probably went through that really fast with time frame and virtual, and it's such a weird adjustment, but hopefully that touched on a lot of questions, or things that folks might have been uncertain about. I saw that some folks were here to revitalize their CCPs, and that's really awesome to hear.
Yeah, and we have about 10 minutes for questions, Cara.
Cool.
I have a question, if that's okay. Thanks for the presentation and all the great tips and images, Cara. Yeah, it's just so engaging. So I work at UBC and I support students that are working with communities on their comprehensive community planning process. And I think this year with the virtual world that we're living in and the community engagement that the students are embarking on is both exciting and challenging. And I was wondering if you had any advice for, and it could be in-person ideas or for virtual, but on things that you might have done to engage youth in the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Youth is so, and yeah, like I mentioned, so important to engage youth. And so, like I mentioned, one of the ways was through schools. We went into schools and did that kind, but now that it's a little bit different. The other ways that we did was we got in touch with the youth coordinators and community and just saw like the different activities they were doing, if we could pop into any of those activities or even host our own little session with them. And our youth coordinators were always super stoked on that, to be able to do that. And one of the actually really cool ways that we did it, and I think would still be safe now, is that we had a youth day out at our lakefront. So Bonaparte has a lakefront out in our territory, but I think any way of getting folks out on the territory is awesome out on the land. And we had that day where we brought the youth out and we just hung out. We rented a boat for the day and it was really fun, and chatted with them and just having them, I think, have that way to trust us and build that relationship. That's the most important piece as well with CCP, is building these relationships where folks can feel like they can reach out to you. And that was a way for us to connect with our youth. So really innovative ways like that, I think, is cool. I know, like even Penticton Indian Band, for example, I know that they rented a bunch of quads for a day and they took out a ton of their members and things like that. So if there's ways that like students can find, like if there's perhaps like a community event that's happening or some way like that to get out, I think that's a really important way to build those relationships and to engage youth in different ways. And especially social media. I mean, kids nowadays, holy man, can they ever do social media like pros compared to us, and things like Instagram. I know communities have developed Instagram pages specific for CCP or even Facebook pages to be able to get that demographic. And so just those things where we know youth are at, I think, is a really cool way to get youth involved.
Thank you. That's great.
Thanks, Maggie. Any other questions? Just going to the chat.
Hi. I was just wondering, what were some of the ways that you guys engaged with community during like COVID? Some of the ways that you kind of like reached out that weren't person to person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so unfortunately, like right now, I'm not in a community role. Like I shared the example from Bonaparte where our Stremel coordinator had reached out door to door and handed out the corn and reached out in that way. And so that's a really cool way that I saw happen. The other ways, like I think for most communities right now, have been virtual through Zoom and whatnot, but I'd be awesome to hear if any other folks have any ideas around how to do engagement during COVID, if anyone has had any examples so far.
Hi, my name's Leona Humchard. I'm from the Celtic Nation of Bella Bella. And we have the beautiful Miss Charity Gladstone, who's working on our CCP, and she's working under Jesse Hempel. So we're pretty excited about this work. I first heard about CCP from Chris Derrickson. I took one of his courses, and I'm pretty excited because really for us, or for me, it's really, putting the planning for our future, with all our people. I'm so excited for that. I really believe that the people should be first, and they should be collectively, mapping out our future plans and that, you know, we have our marching orders as leadership to work off of going forward. I do want to share that HealthTech has used a virtual platform called Ethelo. That's I'll spell it in the chat. And I'm happy to hook anybody up if they're interested in that platform. What it is it's a community engagement and communications platform that we actually used already once last fall to engage our people on a settlement process. It was really, it was pretty comprehensive, and now we want to tailor it for a number of different opportunities to engage our communities. One is the CCP. We're also doing our climate energy plan, so we want to engage our community on that platform as well. You know, we're gonna try and use it for, you know, other things such as economic, strategic economic development. So yeah, it's a good program. I would there's an option for you. Take care. This has been great. Thank you for your presentation.
Oh, thank you so much, Leona. That's so cool. Thanks for sharing. And see, that's the sweet part about the CCP community is everyone has all these different ways that they're doing the work. And it's so cool to come together and hear it and share those best practices and these methods that we have. And so if anyone else has any other ways and they want to put in the chat or they want to share right now, please do. Otherwise, we have a couple more minutes for another question or any comments.
Hey, Cara. Sometimes we get the question, we have CCP champions who are new and they attend your session, they look through the CCP handbook, and then what's next? Can you suggest any words of advice or kind of guidance on where to go from there if you're kind of on your own planning and you may feel alone even though you have this great community? Do you have any advice for planners as they continue on their journey?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. That's really great because that's kind of what happened when I started. I was just hired and our administration is like, okay, go ahead. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do? And so, yeah, there's tons of resources. Like Laura mentioned, there's the Comprehensive Community Planning website that'll share so many things. But if you're just starting out and you're unsure, honestly, like get out into community in the best way that you can right now, with talking to membership, because they're going to guide you through the whole process. And they're going to really guide the process forward in the best way that's going to work, like I mentioned. And so if you can start reaching out to, members who maybe they're members who, typically go into meetings and they have all these big concerns and they are the kind of loud voices in the room and things like that. And perhaps maybe your first step is to reach out to those people and say, hey, I've heard you mention this concern and all these other things come forward. And perhaps you can reach out to them and just say, where should we go from here? And just hear from them and hear directly. And I think that's a really great way to get started, because they'll have these really great ideas come out because they probably feel like they haven't had any way to share those ideas beforehand if there hasn't been opportunities like CCP. And so reaching out to members directly, I think, is a really great way. If you have an elders council or any elders that you can reach out to, any youth, I think to really get started, that's the best way, is because you're going to want those community members' support throughout the whole process, and being able to reach out to them, build those relationships, and that trust is the most important piece. And from there, you'll kind of get an idea of where you need to go, because once you start hearing concerns, like I said, you'll see what the priorities are. And perhaps, like I said, if housing is coming up a ton, it's time to do something around housing. And so that'll maybe be your first meeting or your first survey or your first form of engagement where you're going to plan around housing specifically. And then from that housing meeting, you'll jot down notes, or you'll see in the surveys, this has come up and maybe it's related to something like health. And so perhaps then you want to focus your next meeting on health. And from there, you're going to just see how you're going to need to continue on in your work plan. And from there, you can develop a work plan and you can really just have a really strong idea forward of what you need to do. And then, of course, like I mentioned before, if you're really just struggling, or you just want someone there to help guide you who's someone from outside a community, totally reach out and request a CCP mentor. You can just kind of outline what your idea is behind it. Oops, sorry.
And with that, the mentorship initiative, I posted in the comments there that you can get in touch with one of the staff directly. We also put the link to comprehensivecommunityplanning.org, where you can read a bit more about the mentorship initiative. And again, it's linking communities that have gone through planning or the mentors that have been there, you know, and gone through that process to kind of guide and mentor and just be that ear for some of the planning things you'll encounter.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. Okay, well, I think we're at time. So if no one else had any more questions, I just want to thank you so much again for coming to the session and for giving me the time to present and to share with you all. CCP has a very special place in my heart and always has been since I started. And I hope that you find that really powerful meaning as you go through as well. I think it's so exciting that you're here and to know that your community is going to start out in CCP wherever you're at and really to see what it's going to do for your community. I'm so excited for all of you, and please reach out to me anytime. I'm always open for questions and always here to support in any way that I can. So again, thank you, and I hope you have a really great day in all your other sessions and any other things that you're taking on. So hope you all have a good day, and I will see you virtually sometime, hopefully.